clearly determined already so that we can keep working on it and keep adding new concepts and new constructs. So, deriving from the past, so it's this type of differences or different ways of reading is inevitable because philosophical discourse is in itself dynamic. And not all the issues from the past remain relevant in the changing global philosophical platform. The text historical retain the insight from the past in their own pristine form. Indic or engaged philosophical approach helps us to read text selectively. For example, when we read Mimamsa for addressing issues, we are not engaging in entire commentary of Sabbath, meaning any philosophical dialogue is selective. And as what we discuss must be a topic of common interest, the philosophical approach will help us and engage in Indian approach that will help us revitalize thoughts that are meaningful for global philosophical dialogue. With these two separate approaches, we will not only preserve the ideas and artifacts that have historical relevance, but we will also continue to rethink, revise, and keep alive the systems that have global relevance. If philosophy, engaged philosophy can help us revitalize the epistemology and philosophy of Kumarila and Prabhakar. When philosophical issues are dialogically shaped, thinkers are subjected to us. It is essential that while engaging in our time, we also keep memories from the past alive. Yes, the issues that Sankara addressed or the issues that Prabhakara are not the issues for the philosophical battle in the globe today. But we can derive insights from them and must continue philosophizing new issues, also be the subject of time, just the way Dharmakirti or Prabhakara come. So meaning it needs to be evolving, but that doesn't mean that we need to erase our past, our history, our memory, and all the philosophies that we inherited from the past. Now, I need to explain why the engaged Indic Gurukula model, because I myself am a product of Gurukula. Because the way I was studying, we had pundits, and they would teach us Nyaya and Mimamsa and Vyakara and Vedanta. And I'm not actually trying to defend or argue for it. It has its own relevance in its own place. But the need for us is that type of knowledge, the best of the pundits, and then that type of argument and bring that type of insight into the global context of similar issues where these ideas can be applicable to have a dialogue. And so we have to rethinking or repeating or writing commentaries further and sub-commentaries on Kumarila or Prabhakara. Also not closing books because worthless because they are from the remote past, because the West cannot discover itself by closing their books. Plato and Aristotle still dominate the philosophy departments, no matter how far the West has gone in reading whether Kant or Heidegger or Deleuze. We still start from Plato and Aristotle, the Socratic dialogues from classical Thomas Aquinas, all these. So the way I see is the way the West has been able to redefine its philosophy without erasing what philosophy meant for the Greek. I think we can do something similar, but not being reserved to the remote past and only taking what is best for our times and not being stuck to the commentarial works. That is something I have to exercise in my own life, because books after books to memorize all these different categories, you have to have all these syllogisms, to memorize all the different strata. That taught me how this same logical structure can be applied to address any of the philosophical issues globally. And I do believe that there is value. From the birth of modern writing in English, I mean, Indian philosophers have found Western philosophy as a means to communicate their thoughts, inadvertently creating a new type of philosophy. This tendency is common to almost all the modern writers introducing Indian philosophy, be it B.K. Mathila or Jonathan Gunnet. I'm just naming some of the most known people. While these works have given voice to some Indian thinkers that work in a broader field of comparative philosophy, the framework in which these works have emerged is not sufficiently broad to allow the Indic thinking system to upgrade itself or to develop the ways classical Indian thinking evolved in the works of their commentators. If we take a range of Nyaya positions and models, for example, the leap from Gautama Sutra work to Vatya and Bhashya, or the Vartika of Udyodhara, or the commentary of work of Vachaspati, we cannot anticipate the same leap in this framework that assumes the Western parameters of doing philosophy. Meaning, Nyaya as a philosophy did not exist as a fixed philosophy for any of the classical Raghunatha, the Shiromani. So they were and redefining. And if we take Nyaya that is completely determined or defined, or any other school of Indian philosophy, we won't be actually archiving it. That is the whole concern that I have, that the Indological project is the archival project. The colonial project is about collecting and archiving thoughts, not giving them the fresh lifeblood to rehydrate and to repulsate and come back to relevance for addressing contemporary issues. And if we continue doing philosophy exactly the way the Westerners did, or Greek philosophers, Matilal or Mohanty or other scholars did, we will be following the same track, and we will be only producing more footnotes along the same lines. So, but again, dialogue is essential. Dialogue is inevitable. And all this I'm talking about is so that we have a proper Purva-Paksha prima facie position, not just for ourselves to be understood or to be heard, but also to be able to respond to all the critical issues that they want to know about classical heritage of India or contemporary new philosophies emerging from the subcontinent. So what I believe, therefore, is dialogue, in essence, does not engage to erase borders. Because many people, let's have a dialogue, let's have an understanding, meaning, okay, then you are wrong. So I never view dialogue that way. I have written on culture and dialogue. I've written on dialogical manifestation. If you take a little time to read the way I think of dialogue, like I'm deriving again the very category dialogue, not actually from Bakhtin. Of course, Bakhtin has a substantial amount of thinking on that. I'm deriving from the modes of classical dialogue, and what I see is by the Buddhist philosophers and Hindu philosophers and the Jain philosophers having a heated dialogue among each others between different parties within intra-school dialogue within Sautrantikas and Madhyamakas, or intra-school dialogue between the Dvaitins and Advaitins, never erase any of the schools. Only substantiated, only give them strength, and every school became actually stronger to uphold their own position. Therefore, what I think of this global dialogue that I have in my mind is actually to give birth to the type of systematic philosophy of India that evolves, not just has evolved in the remote past, but evolves for the future in dialogue with the West, the same way Buddhist philosophy evolved in classical India in direction of each other. So as I mentioned earlier, philosophies in classical India were lived rather than being some theories that reflections or reflections upon reflections. A philosopher was a mystic credited with having deeper insights regarding reality than ordinary people have. So I'm not only willing to have a dialogue in having a commonly acceptable category, I'm revisiting the very notion of darsana, darsanika, the way it worked in classical India or medieval India. These people were not simply desktop philosophers who would uphold to any position like the lawyers in the court. You cannot say, sir, you are just advocating for this case. No, they were just hired. For us, those philosophers lived those ideas, practiced, exercised those ideas, and what they were saying meant for them. So Gandhi was not saying in the court, no, for example, he was actually exercising nonviolence, lived nonviolence. So I'm talking about that type of ethos that allows us to actually live philosophy, not just talk about philosophy. Seen from outside, a philosophical tradition or parampara appears to have a singular voice. So people, it's so easy for people to say, what is Indian philosophy? And then, okay, well, there's not one philosophy to say this is Indian philosophy. The same way I work in my work on Advaita Vedanta, everybody says that this is the philosophy of Sankara. Actually, there are so many different streams of conflicting philosophies that are just jumbled together. And since they all belong to the school of Sankara, we just call that Sankara Advaita, as if there is an absolute homogeneity, but that is not the case. And the same applies to every school and sub-school of Indic philosophy. Therefore, even though they were followers, the word follower is a very wrong word as it comes to Indian philosophy. If you read, for example, Sthaneshwar Timalsina, he is a Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Bhashyavartika, for example. He does differ to Shankaracharya substantially, with all due respect, because in our culture we respect our teachers, but that doesn't mean that we blindly follow every single word they have to say. So this is a case study. We should make it a case study that Shankaracharya's direct disciple didn't blindly follow Shankaracharya, meaning that was the extent to which we were differing from our predecessors. So the constant thinking has always been the case, and when we are thinking of parampara, like a tradition, we should not use parampara or tradition in the same dogmatic way that the outsiders like to see. Okay, you are talking about tradition, you must be very dogmatic, you just want to go back to some remote past. No, I'm talking only about taking insights that are agreeable and Patasya Kupoya Miti Pruvana, Charam Jalam Kapurusha Vivanti. Only stupid people say, my father dug this well, so I'm gonna only drink from this well, even when the water has gone toxic. So they were very much aware that we need to address all the new issues and be contemporaneous and live in our own time. And what does it mean to live in our own time? Is not to erase ourselves, our cultural identity. That's what is a broader aspect of our own self. So the self is not in isolation of the totality of what constitutes us as us, our language, our culture, our heritage, our past, our history, memory. All the memories is what constitutes us as the subject. So we are also a cultural self, not just the absolute Brahman self. And so this cultural self is being reconstituted the same way this philosophy or the philosophical self is also being reconstituted, re-evolved. And I'm just only asking us to deeply rethink on how to redefine ourselves philosophically so that our categories are broad enough but also not confusing. So expanding the scope of philosophy in the context. In the above discussion, I've expressed the need for different approaches that serve traditional modes of thinking. As a byproduct of these readings, a new form of philosophy emerges that cannot be reduced to any particular system. Take Gaudapada, for example. It's Agama Shastra. It is not the book of orthodox like typically Advaita. It has so much a substantial amount of element within it. Vidushekhara Bhattacharya has given some commentary on it, but it's Advaita book. So they incorporated all the arguments that the Advaita Vedanta could accommodate, not rejecting every single idea. Sri Harsha does the same thing. He says he won't prima facie position and said, but you are sounding like a Buddhist, and then simply the translation. It's better to be a Buddhist than to be a moron. I mean, what he's saying, like, because those days, for other Vedanta, someone to say happy to be a Buddhist than to be talking about that. Even the classical commentators were enjoying. So we should have some ready-made response to the burning issues on sustainability, some biodiversity, so on animal rights, environmental justice. I keep getting these questions. I'm sure all you philosophers have thought about it, have published on it. So just the day I left Stony Brook, I applied to Delhi. A professor, scientist, and also works for some. And having a big moral issue on animal testing, can you give me any hints on Hindu medical ethics? And yeah, what's the business? Ethics are these are very contemporary issue, and I think that we cannot simply read count at a ban and then put a title or our name is sufficient to say this is the Indian position. So we need to derive from our past, and for that now my final appeal would be we actually should not completely forget all the books from the ancient times. We have to read again. It cannot be the same way that different times, those are different teachers. The day he know Divasagata, those days are gone. But for it's so easy. I'm from Nepal originally. We could not get any books. Forget the library. We didn't have any libraries those days. And there were no e-books available. So only when I came to Varanasi, I had the access to Shastras of the teacher who could teach me those books. So this is so for you within minutes access. You can log into library system. So that's a great thing. Basically coming back, I'm just saying we should derive insights on every single issue. Mind is working on transhumanism. Again, ask it's like whether cyborgs should have some rights. And I first come on, we humans don't have any rights in our real society. Only the people in power are enjoying the rights. But we philosophers are not only reserved to what is exercise, but philosophers need to think for the future. And yes, maybe this is not the time. We are turning more and more machine-like, all the implants and everything. Like we are talking about memory implants now. I don't know where we are going. And machines are turning more and more human. So we will face at one point to again address these also have even if that's to me that's not the issue that I'm gonna go and start thinking for the first time. It's environmental issues. So if you and open the Indian philosophy, be very depressed, very disappointed because the extent of the work that is done, we have not theorized. Simply what I'm saying is they may cite some standards from Bhagavad Gita and say, okay, in the Bhagavatam they say you plant trees. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. We need a philosophy for which we need a proper reasoning and proper theorizing, and these issues have not been theorized. Doing Indic philosophy implies that we accommodate new facts and redefine classical categories. This project is thus different from learning the classical systems in their own pristine form. New discoveries have left behind the physics of another or the biology of Sushruta. We cannot confine the classical systems to their own times and consequently make them irrelevant. As long as it is alive, a system can modify itself, accommodate new ideas, and inject new arguments within the philosophical systems of classical India with the aim of revitalizing these systems. Neo-Kantians extend arguments beyond Kant, but Neo-Kantians thinking does not preclude reading Kant. The same applies to us. But above all, if new physics were to be introduced to Canada or new biology to Sushruta, this does not alter the deep existential or metaphysical issues by which we currently live. Our epistemology or semantics does not alter in accordance with the change in our perspective on physics or biology. The fact that the sun doesn't rise the way the people in the remote past does not the sunrise. If we specify of diversification, we can analyze the project in two lines. The vertical line will address its historical development and explore the forgotten, and the horizontal line will explore new different philosophies on the global scale. Broadly, what I am proposing is giving structure to what is already happening. Historically, many philosophers, despite their highly original thinking, remain buried in the past. Their thinking was either subsumed under a broader umbrella of philosophy, or their zeitgeist left them behind, making their philosophy irrelevant, even to their own time. Certainly, these ideas are worth exploring, as arguments that were deemed irrelevant at one time might reflect differently on our own times. Historical reading also allows us to see the specific schools in their incubation period. Take, for example, the emergence of proto-Sankhya in the Shanti Parvan of the Mahabharata. So, if we read Dipika closely, we will encounter numerous voices within Sankhya. Broader homogenization in the form of a school was a sustained binary process of opponents filtering selected thoughts and opponents objecting to category. Similar to social organization, the process of determining the horizons or making the inside and outside of the systems is a sustained dialogical process. The Brahmajala Sutta, within the canon of the Madhyama Nikaya, at least 62 different philosophical viewpoints, dated roughly between 3rd century and 2nd century of the Common Era. This text is an articulation of the plurality of views in the early days of philosophy in India. So from 62, I don't know where we are today. And 6 and then 1. Texts such as Madhyamaka Hridaya Karika of Bhava Viveka, the Sarva Siddhanta Sangra attributed to Shankara, are very clear in selecting what they view as important history. Even though Sarvadarsana Sangra of Madhava goes beyond the thought, it is not an anthology text on Advaita, addressing the centrality of Advaita with other views. By systematically bracketing Indian philosophy from its access to broader perspectives and grounding the category on the basis of Nyaya, or the classical category of convictity, or the science of reasoning, counters this project. It sacrifices diversity of thought for the sake of elevating a particular argument that has a greater resemblance to the Western analytical tradition. The project of diversification also demands reconstruction of classical thoughts that provide an ample field for this thought experiment to expand the scope of Indic. I myself spent not any less time in Nobenaya than in any other school during my school times. But when I started writing, I have not focused explicitly on Nobenaya. For multiple reasons. Number one, the very technical vocabulary is not sufficient. But most importantly, what I find from Monty to Martial to Ganeri is all the prominent philosophers advocating for Indian philosophy have already worked on nominalitarians. And why did they choose this at the cost of any other school? For Matilal, for example, to work on Advaita Vedanta, that would be too mystical. So, and the same applies for Moneri, for example, who is trying to work on naturalizing all the philosophies. D.P. Chattopadhyay, for example, working on the Charvaka. So we have only the sections from India get a seal of approval from our Western peers. We need to have, there's one small book that inspired the courage to create. It's a very small book, courage to create. I mean, I love the title because I think to create you need to have some courage. Because if you are a philosopher trying to make a completely original argument, first of all, you will be discouraged. Even in my own dissertation, my professor kept discouraging me for 3 additional years. This is not possible. So we all face that at one point in our life, in our career, that what we are trying to defend may be difficult to defend. And that is the fun part of life, that you get a project that not everybody wants to talk about, and that is yours. And it's so sweet. You have your own field. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. Anything can work out in life. So most philosophers are anyway buried in history. Okay. If we end up making a contribution, we will change the course of history. We will change the direction in which philosophy is done globally. And it will not just give us a global identity. It will benefit the entire humanity. It's not for my personal gain or our personal gain, because we are here, we want to be heard. If you have the medicine, just let me give you an example. You have some medicine, and this is not approved by some pharmaceutical companies, and therefore nobody wants to use it. And now sometimes, you have to persuade it. To the loved one, at least we try in our culture. We say, patient says no, and we anyway offer it. So, and then saves life, of course. It is risky business. I'm not saying experiment with it to the, as long as we do not go with what we know is the truth, we will never have the voice to be heard. And if we know that this is good for the humanity, we have even more reason to stand for it, because it will actually help the entire globe. Like ecological issues, for example. Ecological issues are philosophical. We have different philosophical ideas of grounding. Yes, industrialization, urbanization, and wiping out of the nature. All these things are true. We all are doing the same thing. China, India, America, we all are the same. It is so easy to say the very birth of this new model of industrialization is not the model, not the philosophical model that could have emerged from the Hindu or the Indian way of thinking. So that is why we have to have the courage enough to defend some of these ideas, because they are, and they can solve the entire humanity. The idea of engaging Indic philosophy underscores the assumption that philosophical reflection from the Indic culture retains an explanatory capacity for global affairs, during that certain ideas have universal appeal. The concepts having a global application in the dialogical platform demands is a commonly shared epistemology, so that our values and convictions are mutually communicable. Classical Mimamsa and Sautantika dialogues are a testimony for this requirement. Classical Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain philosophical works are testaments to these systems that have historically been open to examination. So there was not a single category in classical India, within Hindu and Buddhist and Jain systems, that the other party could not question. While there is some overlap on epistemic claims, issues such as theoretic intuition, a category broadly shared by classical Indian philosophers, are not universally recognized. Semantic issues have remained contested just the same. Every culture has its own unique category, and translating those categories or transporting these perspectives into another world can be misleading. It can be observed from historical debates on their epistemic systems between disputing schools of thought. We cannot make all categories equal. Cognitive research has established that some culturally sensitive we share across cultures. So, sudden fluent that comes to my head right now, it's this German emotion of enjoying a little bit when someone is suffering. It's a sad happiness. Cognitive research has established that, okay, that's what I say. Meaning there will always be some aspects that defy translation. So some people are, these are untranslatable, Sanskrit is untranslatable, this is horrible thing. We have to get away from that mad because if we want to be relevant in the world, we need to speak up, also speak out. We need to adopt the communicable modes, language. We can always keep saying that this translation is not sufficient, but we can say this is untranslatable. The word water, if you translate as pani from Nepal, we have two words, jal and pani. So I'm using the word jal for a sacred context, pani for a secular context. So the very water, when we are using panido, we do not say give me water for the normal sense. And then in the religious context, that same water we say jal. So offer water. But we have to maybe write a footnote to say that in the word jal is different and pani is different. We should not start saying that Sanskrit concepts can never be translated, therefore jal is something very different from water. That is what stupid people say. Some imagine that dialogues lead to erasing difference. So some are very conservative and say we should not have these dialogues, open dialogues with other people. No. If such were the case, no philosophical differences would have survived among the Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions of dialogues. On the contrary, it allows the parties to define their categories, to modify their presuppositions, to press their arguments, and consequence to institutionalize difference. Only when we start communicating with others, we know what we cannot agree with. And then we also know how far we can agree with each other. It's one thing to say that some categories cannot be translated or that some cognitive states are culturally grounded, but it is quite a different issue when we say language as such can or cannot describe the truth. Semantic theory of the East and West are a testimony to diverse ideas regarding the scope of language. However, theories that advocate the ephemeral nature of language cannot silence the word. They themselves use language for their advocacy. So I find Hindu philosophy rather more liberating in this sense because for now it has the capacity to convey the truth. Actually, the sign difference, the vertical gap between sign and reference as is predominant in Western philosophies. This is not the same case if you read Mimamsa or Abhinavagupta's philosophy rather closely. I should sum up this conversation by addressing objections in the project of diversifying Indian philosophy. Number one, based on the conversation above, we have argued that culture and language are an integral part of philosophical reflection. At the same time, we are arguing for its diversification, a clear contradiction. While the objection is valid that our experiences and the process of theorizing, including philosophizing, have cultural linguistic underpinnings, we can still communicate concepts across cultures without dissociating cultural and semantic parameters. Therefore, before we seek to theorize certain concepts, we have to meticulously examine the cultural and linguistic backgrounds. We cannot ever have a comprehensive communication where we address all the categories from one system to the next. All our conversations are selective, including philosophical dialogues. I've addressed this issue above by citing this article where through dialogue between multiple schools of Buddhism with Hindu schools, shaped all the disciplines engaged in dialogue. While selected issues, weeding out categories that were deemed irrelevant for the broader conversation. This helps shape the commonly accepted epistemology, the first requirement for establishing claims. In the same way, our epistemic work will be renegotiated and some metaphysical claims will be removed. What will emerge from this open space is something new. I don't know what it will be because it's not there yet. But I do not mean that this novelty is a radically new emergent property, but rather manifestation that already existed within the depths of the systems in dialogue. So that's where I'm using Utpattivada, Parinamavada type classical models of new tropes. So rather than saying that we do not ever know what will arise in the future, what I'm arguing is, yes, we cannot completely determine, but we know broadly what it looks like. If I'm planting an eggplant, it is not going to give some eggs. We know that for sure. So this is a homogeneity between cause and effect. And based on that, what type of philosophy we will be doing, we can see paths. The quest for truth and value remains the same even if they appear in different forms, in different times. Our encounter with our own epistemic boundaries and skepticism as a consequence is also not new. From the dawn of civilization, we have all sought meaning for our lives, we have all explored beauty, and we have all felt wonder. What we learn from the very being of the ways that we endeavor to address the process of each other reflection. We should thus consider philosophy as a discipline of perpetual questioning and being perpetual wonder. If some of our questions are answered, we will invent new ones. I don't believe that all our philosophical questions will therefore ever be answered, because then, and I would not like that. So we'll have to, philosophy as a discipline thrives in this threshold of questioning. When we answer to our questions, the conversation shifts from the department of philosophy to that of religion or physics. So when physicists come, many of my friends in engineering or biology, and then they try to understand our discipline the same way, I keep telling them, we have these arguments and these ideas, these theories, and they have the facts. So at least they are told that what they learn is the facts. In our discipline, told that these are the facts. These are some arguments. Two classical Indian schools of philosophy revolve around different traditions, like Parampara. I'm giving an example of Nyaya Mimamsa and the commentary of Bhattacharya or Savara, just to illustrate the same case. To what extent constantly their parameters were redefined for like some 1500 years. The systems were never determined. And I believe that we can utilize the same ethos. We can open the conversation like Ganeri, who points out that new modes of thinking have emerged even while being bound to some traditions. Ganeri read particularly Raghunatha, Tarkashiromani, and on that he has made some really good claims. So now, philosophers in classical times were not simply writing commentaries to explain the category for their predecessors. On the contrary, most commentators made original contributions by adding nuance to some of the most debated issues within the whole. But thinking through the prism of each specific school, the classical philosophers focused on their arguments. Yes, this has limited the scope of philosophy in classical India, but it has also kept philosophy in its background becomes a generational project. On one hand, it limits the scope of philosophical thinking, restricting the dialogue, restricting the discourse within the given parameters. On the other hand, it allows a prolonged exploration in the systematized philosophical debate. The debate on one hand and Nyaya and Mimamsa traditions on the other has allowed all parties to sustain their categorical differences, defend their position more firmly, and revise the positions that are indefensible. This has also given history to Indic philosophical thinking. Themes of thought have revealed their own biology, as they are not seen as placed in some remote historical past, but as gradually evolving through time. Johannes Bromkroos, in his 2019 book, correctly observes, Indian philosophy has a history, that it is more than a list of existed side by side. In its history, innovations and radical revisions took place. I would like to stop at that so that we can have a conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it was an hour of reflection on the way we do Indian philosophy, the Darshana schools that we have, and that too from someone who was, well trained in the classical text in Varanasi. My words are not ready. He will be speaking. Well entrenched in the classical schools, reading the texts, bhashyas, and then again, an interface with the Western world again. That's where, the problematic is set in the last 1 hour. We were, by and large, we were comfortable with our Vada Parampara. We had that Vada Parampara, whether it could be, more than dialogue, I am more interested in a debate. It's part of this whole philosophical schools. We have Vada, Jalpa, Vitanda, presuppositionless philosophizing. We thought we were good at that, and we were. Intra-school engagements, inter-school engagements. That's what we brought it out. Professor Matilal reflected on this. Jain Mohanty struggled with it. Radhakrishnan sir had the trouble in trying to project how the Darshana schools to the Western world. That's where the problem started. We were very comfortable. Vada Parampara was held in its high spirit, and if you have Acharya Shankara's Advaita, you have Venkatananda Vedanta Deshika with its Shatadushani, 100 arguments critiquing Advaita position, Shatadushani. And after a few hundred years, you have Pandit Ananta Krishna Shastri answering those 100 arguments in the form of Shatabhushan. Now I am told another Madhvacharya follower has again written a critique. I am looking forward to answer that. That has been the parampara, that has been the tradition, robust, rigorous. The schools to the text. It was, the problematic was when they faced the West, after the 16th, 17th century onwards, when they had come face to face with the West, how to position Indian philosophic schools. That was our major concern. That's what you heard from Professor Timalsina ji for the last 1 hour. One statement came from Radhakrishnan ji in the foreword to Indian Philosophy, Volume 1. All the schools of Indian philosophy are Moksha Shastra, Samya Darshana Shastra. All the schools. The spiritual aspect of Indian philosophical schools disturbed the likes of Humanities and Matilals and continued into Stephen Phillips and Ganeri continued that. Then came up a second aspect of that Indian schools when they have started categorizing Shiki, the logico-philosophical school. They wanted to present this aspect of philosophizing. You could see all that through the lecture that, and his position,